And I also love it to sleep in a tent and hear the horses graze just next to us.
Hi, I'm Petra Hilleberg. I am here with adventurers Sonja Endlweber and Günter Wamser.
Hello.
So you guys have been on an absolutely amazing horseback journey that started in 1994 at the very bottom of South America, right?
Yeah, I started in close to Ushuaia in Argentina, in Patagonia, and it was a journey. I figured it takes me 4 to 5 years,
Yeah.
but it took a little bit longer. And now I think we're not talking about journey anymore. I think it's a kind of a lifestyle. What happened after that?
So the original goal with the journey was to go from South America all the way up to Alaska.
Right, in 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 years. And then you spent a long time in South America.
It was like 11 years until I got to the border from Mexico to United States. And I want to continue to Alaska, but with the same horses, but I couldn't bring the horses to United States because of health.
The health certificates.
Yes, the horses got sick in Central America, and they could prove it, and so they're not allowed to go into United States.
Okay. But so everything was basically you and the horses and the tent, basically,
and
traveling.
And always a dog. I had always a dog with me. Yeah.
Okay. And you spent a lot of years just doing that, just riding and traveling.
Yeah. If you make calculations, you know how many kilometers can you make a day. So I was not sitting every day on a horse. I like to stay with people, and also I never had a lot of money, so I worked here and there for food, for feed for the horses or for myself, and so that was a good thing. A good chance to meet the people.
Yeah.
And to learn about their culture. So I worked my way through more or less.
Oh, that's fascinating. And then Sonja, so actually first, when you couldn't take your horses into the U.S. from Mexico, you were upset and you were gonna not continue.
Right. Yeah. So because I was upset, I left them back in Mexico. I found a good place for them, and I went back home to Germany. And I said, well, that's it. I'm not continued further. But then I wrote my first book, and when I was writing that book, I relived the whole time, and I said, yeah, that's my way, that's what I want to do. And so I thought, okay, so I take new horses from the United States and continue.
Okay, and that's when you came along.
That was lucky for me that he wanted to keep going. Yeah, I met Gnter in a slideshow presentation.
Okay.
And at this time, I was looking for something new to do. I had been working as a business consultant for 6 years, and then I had gotten a chance to go to Cambodia and work in a development aid project, and I had just returned. And I came back to the old world, to my old job, and I didn't understand the problems anymore. You know, like the business problems I had to deal with, and I knew I had to do something new, and I was open to, you know, for a new job, for a new challenge, for something new. And then I went to a presentation and I knew that's what I want to do. I want to ride a horse across North America. And I sent an email to Gnter with the subject, I'm coming with you. But at this time he wrote back, he was friendly, but he said, well, I'm not taking tourists, I'm sorry. And I immediately responded saying, I'm not a tourist, I want to come for sure, I want to come with you. And I've saved enough money, I know how to ride a horse, and I'm ready to quit my job, and here I am. And I believed it was all true, but saying that I know how to ride a horse wasn't all that true. At this time, I hadn't been sitting on a horse for over 20 years.
Okay.
And she had to make up her mind really fast, because it was 2 weeks before I flew to United States to buy the 2 horses.
Oh, wow.
So I had to make the decision, do I buy 2 or 4 horses.
Yeah.
So she had exactly 2 weeks to think about it.
Or you had 2 weeks to think about it too.
Yeah, true.
But then you said yes.
Yeah.
And you said yes.
Yeah, I didn't have to think about it. I just knew that's what I wanted to do, and it felt right until we were on our first ride in the mountains with the Mustangs that are great horses, but they were young and unexperienced like me, and it's just not a really good combination. So the first weeks were scary, and I was actually in tears almost every day.
But you stayed.
I stayed.
But so if we backtrack, so then so you got Mustangs that were through a prison program, right?
Yeah. Down in Canyon City, where they kept the horses, and they're trained by inmates, and I think they really did a good job. And I like the program, and so we decided to get the horses down there.
And then you did the Continental Divide Trail.
It's a trail which goes from Mexico all the way to Canada, and it's just fascinating what people did with this trail. And it's a trail for hikers. That means it's always up on
The ridges.
ridges, and that's what we appreciate, right? To have a nice view, and and because it's mostly government land, so we don't have to ask nobody, can we camp here, can the horses eat the grass or so, because in Latin America, wherever it's a piece of grass has an owner, so you have to always ask. And that was beautiful up here, and it was never an issue with food or with water in the mountains.
And obviously the whole time you stayed in tents.
Yes.
So you started out when you were by yourself with the biggest tent, Caron 4 GT.
Yeah, it was for myself maybe a little bit big, but I also had a German Shepherd dog, and he slept in a tent. He had his own part here, and I used it also for a tech shop. Like I got all my equipment always in a tent. Everything was in a tent.
So then you went from one person in a Caron 4 GT with a dog to 2 people to a nomad 2.
And
right?
the dog, but the dog got a lot smaller.
That's funny. But now you said you've gotten a little more comfortable. You've been using a Caron 3 GT on this latest trip, right?
Yes.
Yes,
So
with the big vestibule, and especially this summer we were really grateful for it, as we had July almost everyday rain.
That was in Canada, yeah. Every day, rubber boot time, yeah.
And then it's so nice, you have the vestibule, you go in there dropping wet, and you take all the wet gear off, and you can store it, and your main living bedroom is still clean.
And then you continued on through Canada.
And then we continued up in Canada. They have also a kind of a Continental Divide trail, but it doesn't really exist. So that was even more adventure, and worse, like in Yukon, there is almost no trails. So we have to find the outfitters or hunters who help us. They knew something, there could be a trail or so, because we never want to ride on a road, right? Because it's such a beautiful country, and if we ride a horse, we want to do what horses do, like.
Yeah. But you made it up all the way up to Alaska.
Yeah.
And then you started over a little bit.
Yeah, getting to Alaska, it never felt for us like now we got to the final goal. It was not anything we celebrated. It was just a day like any other days. It was the end of this journey, but not the end of the lifestyle.
Yeah.
And for me, always was like not the goal. It was like a point to orientate.
Yeah.
Like that I know where I want to go. Otherwise, you start and making circles or so.
Yeah.
So you know where to go, north. So yeah.
So obviously, then you're out with a tent every night. So it basically becomes your home, right?
It is. I mean, for years we didn't have a proper home. When we would go home, we could sleep in his parents' house, but we really just had one room and a bed, and that's it. Our home is the tent, and I always say the most beautiful thing about the way we travel is that you look for your place every day, and you can decide if you want the hillside or more the valley bottom. If you want to have sunshine in the morning or in the evening, it's as if you build up your house by scratch every day.
Yeah.
And we fence our horses in, and right in the middle is our tent, so the whole family is together.
Everyone is together.
That makes it really
The reason for this is that we were traveling through grizzly bear country a lot, and having the horses and the electric fence around us, not really the electric fence, more the horses, having them so close by the tent, it makes us feel more comfortable. Yeah. And I also love it to sleep in a tent and hear the horses graze just next to us.
So, again, living in your tent every day, like why, was there a particular reason why you, when you started, picked the Caron 4 GT, for instance, right?
Well, one of the reasons we pick Hilleberg tents is if you live like we do, we don't have much money, but we want to live out there, and we can't allow to be cheap. Like we need equipment that is reliable and long-lasting.
It starts, for example, with shoes. If you just can take one pair of shoes, you don't want that they break on a trail, because then you don't have one. And because we cannot take so much, we want good stuff.
Yeah. Do you have any tent stories that you?
Oh yeah, we in South America had this Caron 4 GT, which is a huge tent, and I went on Aconcagua on an expedition, and I took my tent and I took the inside inlet, the mosquito part out, and I think we have been sitting there with 15 people in that tent and drank mate tea. Oh. Yeah, so it's a huge tent.
That's nice.
Other tent stories, it's your story, so you have to tell it with
the children.
Yeah, when you said.
Yeah, so somewhere in Altiplano in Bolivia, I stopped close to a school, and all the kids, I want to go in the tent, right? And they looked like, and they said, yeah, if you want, you can look inside. But I was not fast enough. I was one after the other. Yeah. And then all of a sudden 20 kids were in the tent.
So now this last trip you came from Montana, right?
On the Pacific Northwest Trail.
The Pacific Northwest Trail. Mm-hmm. That's great.
So we came years ago through the United States on the Continental Divide Trail, which goes in Montana through the Glacier National Park. And there is where the Pacific Northwest Trail started, going to west to the Pacific West Trail. This trail was Sonja's idea, because I was sailing, I want to try a new lifestyle, and she didn't want to wait, so she looked what she wanted to do. So she came up with this Pacific Northwest Trail. So you want to say something about that trail, because you're
the one who found
it. Your idea, yeah?
Yeah.
But I'm happy that you found it.
Yeah, when we were traveling northern Canada and Alaska, it was really tough traveling. We were riding for like hundreds of kilometers without a trail, just cross country, finding our own way, following game trails. And all the time I was thinking about the Continental Divide Trail, about the long distance trails, the established trails in the United States that are just perfect to travel with horses too. And so I wanted to go on the PCT, but I thought to connect the two trails with the Pacific Northwest would just be perfect. So we could almost maybe do a whole loop.
Yeah. So you've been obviously on a lot of trails throughout the U.S. and in Canada.
Yes, and this really is an opportunity to say thank you to everybody that's out there working on the trails. We always meet trail crews that are doing really hard work, keeping those trails in shape. And it is a privilege for us, especially for us Europeans, to come here and ride on these great long distance trails in the United States. So thank you to everybody out there that is working on the trails.
That's great. Well, thank you again so much for
coming
and being here and sharing your story.
Thank you.
Thank you.